Released by Spike Chunsoft in 2016 on the Nintendo 3DS, PS Vita, and PC, Zero Escape Zero Time Dilemma is the third game in the Zero Escape series. Written and directed by series creator Kotaro Uchikoshi, the game chronologically takes place between 999 and Virtue's Last Reward. For story, the game features a man named Carlos, as decision paradoxes continue to be explored with multiple timelines and dimensional travel among locked room death games testing morals and freedom. For gameplay, the game is similar to Virtue's Last Reward, in which there are puzzle segments, cutscenes, and visual novel segments leading to decision points progressing a story into over 30 possible endings, 7 of which are needed in order to achieve the true ending. There are primarily 4 intersecting timelines, some of which have 2 or 3 branching timelines of their own. This installment utilizes improved 3D models and environments, as well as voice acting for all cutscenes. Like before, each room contains a locked room puzzle and sequence of interrelated puzzles that must be explored and solved in a first-person perspective. Keep in mind, the game is originally played in a very non-linear fashion, expecting the player to be learning clues in one timeline and crossing into another timeline to use them. For this video, I will be reconstructing the story with the routes intact from each major timeline split into the true ending. The story only gets larger from here, so let's cut it down to size with a recapitation. As the game begins, it's December 31st, 2028 at the decomp facility in the Nevada desert. 9 people find themselves imprisoned with strange wristbands strapped on them. Their surprise is interrupted when a strange masked man greets them all, lamenting how unfair life can be, even giving a strangely specific example of how there are moments when a snail can make the world go extinct. He states he requires all 9 of them to take part in a game, one he claims will determine the fate of the human race. He produces a coin with a red and blue side, flips it into the air and steps on it before the result is shown. He asks them to guess which side is facing up and only allows them one guess. He guarantees that if they guess correctly, then he will let them all go, but if they guess wrong, then they will have to stay in the game until at least 6 of them are dead. He declares a man named Carlos as the leader of the group who will speak, and after the group bickers, he makes his decision, which turns out to be correct. Keeping his promise, the man in black agrees to free them and promptly gasses them to sleep, stating they won't remember any of this. When the group wakes up, they are indeed all outside the facility, awake and unharmed, though puzzled at why they are there. Some of them can vaguely remember the coin flip bet, but attention is drawn to the strange helmeted child with them as their strange experiment ends. After Carlos picks a different choice, it turns out to be incorrect, and so the game continues. The man gasses them all, and the next thing they know, they each wake up in separate rooms. In one room, a skittish man named Eric panics and immediately accuses a child with an odd helmet named Q to be the person who brought them all there, though a woman named Mira tells him to calm down. In another room, Sigma and Phi advise a woman named Diana not to attempt to force the bracelet off her wrist. In the last room, Carlos is paired with Akane and Junpei, who relate this to the nonary game they played a year ago. At this time, the masked man appears on the screen before them all, introducing himself as Zero the Second. He informs them this is a recording and begins telling them a story of how one morning, a woman went jogging in the park, saw a snail down her usual route, and decided to take a different path than she normally did. Unfortunately, she was murdered in the same park just after this, and his point being that sometimes life and your choices in it are simply unfair. After this, he informs them they are in a bomb shelter 50 meters below the surface, and each of them are on a separate ward. Carlos, Akane, and Junpei compose of Team C, led by Carlos. Next, Q, Mira, and Eric are in Ward Q to be led by Q. Finally, Diana, Phi, and Sigma are in D Team, led by Diana. He explains that they may freely explore their respective wards, but after 90 minutes, a memory-erasing drug will be administered to them through their bracelets, making them forget those 90 minutes. To help them, the watch does also tell time. In addition, each ward has a door marked with an X that leads to an elevator, which is the only way out. To open the X door, 6 X passes are needed, and an X pass is gained every time someone dies. Finally, the door will open only once for 30 seconds and then will never open again. To expedite the death count, a terminal has been set up where by majority vote an entire team can be killed. Only the team leader can submit a vote by a certain deadline, though should they choose not to vote, then that team will die. Naming this the decision game, a game of fate, he reminds them the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. With Carlos's team, their ward contains a prep room, decontamination room, control room, power room, an infirmary, a pantry, and a rec room. They see there truly is no other exit, and Junpei and Akane restate how Zero really will kill off an entire team without a second thought. Akane thinks to somehow contact the other teams and urge them to spread out the votes so everyone votes but no one gets a majority. Junpei suggests Akane use the morphogenetic field to telepathically reach out to them, but Akane instead draws their attention to some writing on the wall. Junpei also notices a strange red box with a keyboard labeled Force Quit Box, but there doesn't seem to be a use for it now. As they brainstorm until the voting deadline, they talk for a bit. Carlos learns that Akane and Junpei are childhood friends who separately happen to sign up for this decom experiment, while Carlos is a veteran firefighter who was in need of a lot of money. As Akane reminds them countless people are suffering from a strange disease called Reverie Syndrome, they hear something in the vents and a little dog named Gab comes out, who is also in the decom facility. Gab is a trained animal who normally bears a container with medicine, but they notice his pouch is empty. Thinking the vents connect to the other wards, Carlos gets an idea to write a note to spread out the votes and send it to the next team, in which they will vote for D team votes for Q team, and Q team votes for C team. If their message for voting for D team got through, then they should personally change their vote the opposite way, making Q team actually receive 2 votes and thus be killed to put them closer to escape. Over with Q team, their ward contains a prep room, decontamination room, quantum computer dome, pod room, and a biolab. In their lounge, they also notice a cryptic message on the wall, but also find Q's helmet has a password input on its side, suggesting it may be able to come off. As they talk, Q cannot remember anything about his past, while Eric and Mira have an ambiguous relationship. They wonder who Zero could be, and speculate it could even be the Heartripper serial killer that has been in the news recently, who started with killing a woman in a park, though Q strangely has specific information on that person's body count. For now, they also wonder if this is all part of the decom, or dwelling for the cohabitation of Mars, which is an experiment to see if they could live on Mars. They had already spent 5 days together alongside a dog, but Q is the one person who wasn't there. Mira claims she joined because it seemed fun, and Eric admits he joined just because Mira did. They notice the force quit box in their room and wonder its purpose, but Gab now enters their room from the vents. They notice his case and find Carlos's note and plan. They agree with the idea of spreading the votes, and Q writes in his confirmation. Finding a way to notify Group D now, they send Gab on his way, but Mira points out they've put themselves in a dangerous position, where if Carlos is planning to betray them with his plan, then it means Q Team will be the first to die. However, they have no time to discuss it as a time to vote comes upon them. Now with Diana's team, they read a strange note in their room, and Phi wonders if it's another anagram based on a previous experience she's had. Sigma meanwhile is investigating a strange force quit box in their room. Their ward contains a prep room, decontamination room, healing room, transporter room, manufacturing room, trash disposal room, and a locker room. Phi cheekily asks Sigma to die so they can get a clue for the X-Pass, but he refuses. It's brought up how he has his mind from the year 2074, so he knows what will happen in the future, which is why Akane, Phi, and himself came to this facility. They hear something in the vents and see Gab the dog emerge, surprised to see him here too. As Phi and Sigma continue to heckle each other, Diana sees the note in his collar and reads Carlos's message as confirmed by Q Team. Diana agrees with the plan to spread out the votes, but Phi points out there was a chance for betrayal. Q Team probably won't betray since they otherwise did not have to send Gab, but if C Team instead votes for Q Team, then that team will die. However, if Q Team is sticking to the plan, then they can instead vote C Team too and kill that team. As Q Team voted for C Team as planned, Diana betrayed the plan and also voted for C Team, killing off Carlos, Akane, and Junpei. Q Team wakes up locked up in a biolab at 1810. As they solve the escape puzzle involving cutting open a pig, Zero comes on a monitor, relating the fate of this animal to a woman who was killed 17 years ago as her chest was cut open and her heart ripped out while she was still alive. The man suspected of it also happened to call a taxi at the same time. While he was captured, a genius surgeon instead got in the taxi and went on his way to save a seriously ill patient. Unfortunately, the taxi got in an accident that killed both the driver and the surgeon, and later the young boy waiting for surgery. Again, he states life is simply unfair, as he now instructs them on the decision game they are to play. They now have 3 vials full of a virus called Radical 6, which among other things will make one want to kill themselves, and boasts a mortality rate of 75%. He also makes them aware of another virus called the Fanatic Bio R, which makes blood erupt from the body and has a mortality rate of 100%. Interestingly, being infected with both causes them to kill each other off, so each deadly virus is actually an antidote to the other. He now tells them he is a clairvoyant who knows the future, and says they have a choice that results in them being fine either way. If they choose to inject themselves with Radical 6, then it is because they have already been infected with Fanatic Bio R, and they will be fine. If they do not choose to inject themselves with Radical 6, it is because they have not been infected with Fanatic Bio R, and they will be fine. Their choice will actually replace the causality, and really hinges on if they believe Zero's words or not. Q spells out the slightly higher probability that injecting themselves is actually the smartest gamble, given the mortality rates of their respective viruses and their choices. After injecting themselves, Mira suddenly makes a move, then killing Eric and quickly moves to stab a confused Q, laughing at it all. Meanwhile, D-Team wakes up locked up in the healing room at 1805, and Phi wonders if they've really been asleep for just 4 hours or have been woken up several times and made to forget each one, and she doesn't mean just this timeline. As they solve through the puzzle of this room, they return to the lounge where Diana asks how old Sigma actually is, and he explains his body is 22 but his mind is 67. He and Phi came here in an unusual way from the year 2074, though Phi's mind is still roughly around 20-something. In her case, she's been frozen asleep from 2029 to 2074, so she didn't age for 45 years. The means is the shift phenomenon, which stands for space-time human internal fluctuating transfer, and in layman's terms means the human mind is sent through time and space. In their case, they have been able to remember things in alternate timelines where alternative decisions took place, but as for how they're able to do it, he doesn't actually know. All he does know is that if a person has the ability to shift, and if their life is in danger, shift kicks in. They now wonder where Phi suddenly vanished to, and at this time the intercom kicks in and announces the deaths of C-Team as well as Eric, and Diana has a sudden flash of seeing C-Team die due to losing their initial vote. Suddenly, the lights cut out and the emergency lights kick on. From the shadows, Mira in a dark robe then rushes, stabs, and kills all 3 of them, thus successfully escaping with the needed amount of X-passes. Q now wakes up, alive and confused about why he's alone now, as he hears the intercom update the deceased total to all of D-Team, all of C-Team, and Eric, as well as Mira who has used the X-Door. A memory flash of everyone dying, especially to Mira murdering them all, washes over him as he wonders how he's still alive after being stabbed. On cue, Zero comes onto his screen, saying if he wants to know the answers to his questions, then come to the Quantum Computer Dome. There, Zero is actually present in person, as he says Q is free to kill him if he wishes, but Q demands instead to know the truth. With a wave of his cane, multiple doors open around the room, each containing a replica Q. Zero explains these are spare bodies for Q, as well as labor for various tasks around the shelter, as he shows a few at work right now cleaning up the bodies in the different wards. He also confirms Q is not human, and his thought center is not even within his body, but instead inside the quantum computer. There, he thinks and feels and outputs whatever he wants to do to his body. Q insists he has a heart that feels, and Zero suspects that is something left over from the body he was modeled off of, who died from an incurable disease at age 10. The boy's name was Sean, and it was Sean's personality they built Q with, but Q questions why bother when a simple robot would have been enough. Zero reflects on his answer and replies that he simply wanted to see the world through the eyes of Sean, but now still needs him to play one last decision game. A copy is created of Sean who lives in the quantum computer in the simulated world, living a happy life like none of this ever happened. However, for the original Sean, he's still in reality, as Zero tells him another story. He relates how a senior citizen and a boy with an incurable disease once met in a hospital. The boy was extraordinarily gifted and loved to read, so in exchange for books he would share some of his knowledge with the elder. The boy was promised a job when he was cured, but unfortunately life was unfair, and the doctor who was to treat him died. Still, the boy did not despair, and though he gave up on life, he did not give up on his dreams, which he shared with the elder. He mentions the quantum computer contains all of the infinite number of realities within space, and then tells him the combination to unlock his helmet, stating there will be a time when it will be needed. Using it immediately, Q is eager to remove his helmet at long last, but he is dismayed to find out what he thought was his helmet truly was his head. When at the injection decision, Q rationalizes that the focus is if they have FBR or not, and not if Zero can see the future, and so chooses not to inject themselves. Especially so since he's never heard of a killer virus called FBR, but has heard of Radical 6 before. On cue, the door to the biolab opens, and Eric and Q are quick to exit. Mira pauses and picks up a vial of Radical 6, chuckles to herself, and decides to hide it on her. As they return to the lounge, Mira asks more about the virus, and Q shares the name Radical 6 comes from how it slows the thought processing by 1√6. It is also able to mutate one's body composition and flip genetic switches when exposed to danger, to awaken previously hidden parental characteristics, like a child gaining the psychic powers of its parents. Either way, Radical 6 is highly infectious and can spread through liquids, so exposure outside this facility would spell global doom. The intercom now announces the death of C-Team and promptly puts the team to sleep. Meanwhile, D-Team wakes up in the manufacturing room, and while Diana is curious about the robots before them, she notes Sigma is strangely quiet and sad for some reason as he looks back at her. Noting the time is 1810, they get to work trying to get out of the locked room they're in. They notice Gab is missing and Phi goes to look for him, while Diana asks Sigma about how he acted in the last room. He explains he made some robots in the past, mostly to fulfill a plan in motion, but partly because he was lonely. He spent decades living underground in a shelter by himself, though for the first 3 years he did live with a woman with whom he spent time researching and mastering various sciences together. Unfortunately, the low gravity that had to be in the facility caused an illness that killed the woman, and the grief overwhelmed him for many years. As a result, he spent 25 years building a robot and fashioned it to look and act similar to her. He named her Luna, and found that he came to love her as a daughter of sorts. Interrupting them, Vi comes to them with an idea. Beyond the decontamination room is the elevator, but the door is welded shut. Vi thinks to use the explosives they found in manufacturing to blow the door open, having Sigma help with that, while Diana notes a taser to the side. On a screen, Zero comes in, not pleased with this endeavor, as he views it as a rules violation of leaving outside of the X door. Still, he'll let it slide this time, as since on the other side of that decontamination room happens to be an unconscious Q team, so they'll certainly die if the bomb does work. Diana then hurries to turn off the bomb, but Sigma states they have no time and locks them out of the room while he saves them all. He promises not to die, and while the bomb does go off, Sigma manages to survive, albeit short one eye and both arms. As the path to Q ward is now open, they go to check on Q team and unfortunately see that Q and Eric are dead while Mira is gravely wounded. As she dies, she says Zero told them it was D team that set up the bomb, and as revenge she stabs Phi with the vial containing Radical 6. As the tunnel between the wards collapses, D team is now trapped in Q ward, and Sigma notes that with his injuries and Phi's infection, it seems this history is the one that connects to the future he is familiar with. Phi insists they kill her and burn her remains right now, but Diana refuses to comply, instead stunning Phi with the taser she found, insisting they escape from the facility and save the two of them. Riding up to the surface, there is a live radio already trying to hail them, and Diana responds, reporting they have 6 dead with them, but then she corrects herself, accepting she has effectively killed 6 billion people. As Sigma accepts the inevitability of this past, he hopes the Sigma from the future that returns here will do better. Over in the transporter room, Akane and Junpei's copies step out safely and notice that D-Team escaped unconventionally by setting off a bomb in the decontamination room. At this time, Zero comes on the screen, noting they safely arrived in the timeline where he is alive and they are dead. He first confirms with Akane that this timeline is the one where Radical 6 has escaped the facility, and its first patients already left and are on their way to a hospital now to incidentally begin the pandemic. He now mentions that Free the Soul's plans is progressing smoothly, and reveals that he is Brother, the founder of that cult. However, he points out that by doing things this way, it avoids an even worse fate for humanity, as while this disease will kill 6 billion, it replaces a future in which a fanatic terrorist starts a nuclear war and kills 8 billion. Junpei cannot believe how insane that logic is, but Zero points out history has already proven him correct, and not to mention, the loss of innocent life once again shows how unfair life can be. He says Akane should know something about that since her father was killed for a crime he did not commit and her mother killed herself out of grief. He invites her to see things his way, pointing to a cultist robe nearby for her to wear to a meeting they'll have in a few months. He also mentions this shelter is considered a sacred site by their group, as it's where he was born, though as soon as he was transported using the same transporter they used to 1904. He mentions he had a little brother named Left, though they were not related by blood, and he has a younger sister and it's someone they know well. Before leaving, he gives them a phrase to open the Force Quit box, and while they wonder what to do next, they see Gab with a note on his collar. The note states anagram, and when remembering the phrase on the Ward C lounge wall, they rearrange it to make it "Together with me, we are 10, with the remaining letters that spell Delta. Just then, the wall near them explodes, and Carlos now comes in to the rescue, wherein he shifted to the history where he pushed the yellow button in the decontamination room and allowed only their team to live. He then used the unused transporter in that timeline to jump back to this timeline 10 months earlier. However, Junpei and Akane inform him it's too late, and the virus has already left to infect the world and kill 6 billion people. Akane says it's over, and now she'll have to spend 45 years preparing for her plan. She reveals that in 45 years she'll call Sigma and Phi's consciousness to the future, and a plan to save those 6 billion people. Junpei insists on helping, but Akane states she needs him to forget everything now, and uses the drug in the wristband to knock him out and make him forget. Akane repeats again she won't let anything block her from achieving her goal, even if it means dying herself, as she is committed to the success of the AB plan. As she walks away to begin work on this new endeavor, events now play out from here to lead into the game Virtue's Last Reward. As D-Team voted for Q-Team as planned, Carlos betrayed the plan and also voted for Q-Team, killing off Q, Mira, and Eric, who during their struggle to resist the explosive collars discover a hidden yellow door before dying. C-Team wakes up in the infirmary and Carlos notes at time at 1810. Zero chimes in and tells him a story of how 17 years ago a woman was killed, and a month later a male suspect was found guilty for her death. That man's wife took her own in grief, and their 2 children were left behind. As time passed, new DNA evidence found that the man was actually innocent, and the real killer was never found, again expressing how life isn't fair. In the same vein, all of them have been injected with a deadly poison, though the antidote is hidden in the room they're in. After locating a real antidote and taking it, Carlos has a memory flash in his mind, but not from this timeline, as when they recover from the poison, the intercom announces the death of Q-Team. Finding they have 3 antidotes left over for some reason, Akane suddenly thinks the other team is in danger, and hurries to send them the antidote with Gab's help. As they hope it gets to them in time, Carlos shares the haunting vision he saw and wonders if it's a prophecy, though Akane points out it not to be a future but an alternative past he glimpsed. She explains the morphogenetic field as a dimension they cannot see but still acts as a medium for information they can access. Carlos thinks it's just his instincts at work again, but Akane suggests those instincts are just Carlos unknowingly glimpsing alternative memories, as he has done when fighting fires and saving people. As such, she concludes Carlos must be an Esper, just like Akane and Junpei, though Junpei confesses he hasn't been able to use the power recently. Cutting them off, Zero comes in to announce he is putting them to sleep again, and this time their memories from the last 90 minutes will be erased. D-Team now wakes up in the trash disposal room, and the time is 1806, though they find Phi trapped in the incinerator. While hurrying to free her, Sigma is locked in a chair, in which the only way out is to play Russian roulette with a loaded revolver. Zero Nine chimes in with the same story of the woman who died 17 years ago and the man who was falsely accused dying for it, the taxi driver and the surgeon who died for it, and the patient who died because of that. He recounts 6 deaths from this one chain of events that started simply because of a snail that appeared in the road. However, the lives of 6 billion people will now be lost because of that same snail, repeating again that life is simply unfair. He then explains the decision game they must play, as the revolver is loaded with 6 bullets, though 3 are blanks and it's randomized within the chamber. The door to the incinerator will also only open once the gun is fired, and the gun has a 50% chance of firing a live round, so a decision must be now made by Diana. Diana pulls the trigger hoping for a blank, though after the doors to the incinerator door open they are horrified to see Sigma dead. Phi is distraught at the loss, while Diana is at a loss for words. Seeing the gun available again, Diana quickly grabs it, and wishing to be with Sigma, shoots herself in the head, leaving a broken Phi alone. Back with C-Team, Carlos is startled awake by visions of his own death by losing the initial vote, but sees they are now locked in the rec room and it's 10 minutes into the new year. Junpei continues to be moody, and Kane knows the Junpei she used to know is still somewhere in there. Carlos catches Junpei rolling a ring in his hand and advises him to say what he needs to while there's still time. He shares how when he was 18, he had only just passed the firefighter exam when he came home during his sister's birthday and saw his house on fire. He managed to save his sister but not his parents, and regrets to this day not being more thankful to his parents. Again, he encourages both of them to say what they need to before it's too late, which gives Junpei something to think about, as they now focus on escaping the room. Solving the puzzles within, they find themselves at gunpoint and now before a decision game in which an intercom explains to them they each need to roll a die, and need to each get a 1 else they all die. Frustrated at such an absurd game, Junpei shouts that he still has something to say, but throws the dice anyway, which has a 1 in 216 chance of success. As the odds would have it, they fail in the roll and the guns fixed on them prepare to fire. Thinking to duck behind the bar's cover, they all attempt to dodge the hail of bullets, but it proves useless as they are quickly executed. In another timeline, as the odds would have it, they all roll 1s and everyone is shocked at the miracle. Ecstatic, Junpei jumps for joy and cheers, defying death today, merrily wanting to celebrate their survival, and Akane is relieved to see a lighthearted Junpei once again. However, she says her success wasn't so much a miracle as it was an eventuality, as while they only perceive things as their first throw, it's more likely that many throws were made in alternative possibilities, and this one they're in happens to be the one where they succeed. Junpei feels a little less enthused hearing all that, as the intercom informs them the current casualties, which are Q-Team plus Diana and Sigma. Diana pulls the trigger, hoping for a blank, and after the doors to the incinerator door open, they are relieved to see Sigma is still alive, albeit with a blasted eardrum. The intercom now announces the current casualties of Q-Team, but suddenly all 3 of them are gripped by the effects of poison. Fortunately, Gab comes in just in time with the antidote procured from C-Team, and they feel the relief immediately. As they recover, it comes out that Phi actually is naturally red-haired, but before long, Zero knocks them all out again. With C-Team, they now wake up locked in the reactor room, as it's now 10 minutes into the new year. Carlos mentions how he never missed wishing his sister a Happy New Year, especially since she fell ill 10 years ago and has been in the hospital ever since. Carlos would always visit her after work, and mentions how every greeting and parting was important to them. Taking this to heart, Akane turns to wish Junpei a Happy New Year, something she wished she could do for the last 10 years, and embarrassed, Junpei doesn't know what to say. Carlos jokes that Junpei should be a better boyfriend, but Junpei quickly states they're just childhood friends, though Carlos jabs back that they seemed like they were already dating to him, as they turn to focus on the task at hand. While solving the puzzle, Akane gets knocked out, and they now hear that Q-Team's members are the only ones dead so far. Continuing to find a solution, Carlos and Junpei find a room containing a short version of the AB or Ambidex game. The game simply pits Carlos against Junpei, in which they must vote at the same time to either ally or betray each other, with the lives of everyone in the shelter at stake here. Whoever gets the 9 BP gets to leave the room, and anyone dropping to 0 BP dies. If they both ally, then they both get 3 BP, but if one person chooses to betray the ally, then they gain 6 while the other loses 3. Sigma and Diana's lives are tied to Carlos, while Fi and Akane's are tied to Junpei, and Carlos says they simply have to hit ally twice to have everyone survive. Before they begin, Junpei checks in on Akane and reminisces on their school day memories, knowing that ever since then, Akane always tried to bear the burden quietly on herself, but he wants to be with her to help share the load and also protect her when he can. Now entering the AB game together, Carlos has memories of when they played this game in alternate timelines, in which Junpei first hit Betray on Carlos' ally, but also when Carlos accidentally hit Betray on Junpei's ally, anticipating a betrayal. Akane then wakes up and, hearing this, concludes Carlos must actually be an Esper, and his power is the ability to shift, in which right before he dies, his consciousness will jump to a timeline where he doesn't die. It's a version of sending and receiving information through the morphogenetic field like how she and Junpei can do, only with him it's his entire consciousness. She then gives an example detailing time travel using Back to the Future's theories, and brings up the grim overlooked detail that the Carlos who shifted is actually switching places with the one originally in this time, either killing or overriding back Carlos, but now shifted Carlos retains his alternative knowledge. Either way, that's how shifting works, and Carlos relates how he experienced it before with firefighting, and reveals how his sister is suffering from reverie syndrome. Akane explains his sister is actually also an Esper, and is either getting paralyzed with too much information from the morphogenetic field, or her consciousness keeps jumping between histories. In truth, reverie syndrome is just her Esper powers running rampant, so there is actually hope for her. Also, during the fire that killed their parents, Carlos was able to hear her voice so clearly because of the morphogenetic field, while it's easier to access the closer the user is to death or danger. Suddenly, Akane has the idea for all of them to shift to another timeline and ignore the AB game entirely. In order to place them all in danger, she sets the reactor to explode, but isn't sure where they will shift to. Suddenly, Junpei has the idea to jump to the timeline where they lose the dice toss, and to trust him with a plan. Linking together, the 3 Espers use Carlos' shifting powers to gamble on Junpei's plan. Going back to when they lost the dice roll, Junpei hides Akane in the fireplace and says Carlos and him will protect her and die being her living shields, and shift to the winning roll timeline. Carlos objects, but Junpei continues, saying Akane will then learn 7 X passes from this timeline and can then shift to the timeline where they all win the toss and share the information. As they now jump to the safe timeline, Junpei's plan worked, though his recklessness still upsets Akane. She doesn't want to ever be the sole survivor and lose the one she cares about the most, and reading the scene, Carlos quietly steps away. Junpei apologizes first, not meaning to cause her pain, and takes his time to present her a ring, bringing up he never forgot her dream of one day wearing a ring on her left hand. Accepting the proposal, the two embrace, though Akane makes fun of him for accidentally putting the ring on her right hand instead. To that, Junpei sheepishly states they'll move it to the correct hand once they escape from here. Moving on, she states that she remembers the missing X-passes despite normally one forgetting alternate histories after shifting, but Junpei points out both he and Carlos remember other timelines too, and she thinks their powers have been strengthened due to the resonance effect. Now going to the X store, they enter the 2 X-passes they gain, but are shocked to find neither are accepted. On cue, the intercom informs them that X-passes are set to their respective histories, so alternate timeline X-passes are not accepted. Junpei laughs in defeat, learning Zero already planned for this and their efforts were in vain, and quickly dashes off to kill himself so Akane and Carlos can properly leave. However, a red-eyed Q is curiously waiting for him around the corner and knocks him down. Wondering how he got over here, Carlos has a vision of Mira discovering the hidden yellow door, though Q quickly subdues them all, saying they violated the rules and will be eliminated for it. As he dodges the lethal strikes from Q, he wonders why he could see Q-Team just then, but thinks of shifting away now to a way to save the 3 of them here, and shift back here to do so. Unfortunately, Diana is unable to pull the trigger to save Fi at the cost of Sigma. Sigma struggles as hard as he can to try and save Fi, which Fi appreciates. Fi tells Diana not to blame herself because she actually made the right decision, and gets the feeling she'll see them again. She wishes Diana and Sigma to be happy together, telling them she loves them and allows the fires to consume her. Sigma is let go from his trap, and as they mourn the loss of Fi, Diana sees Fi's brooch and has a flashback to a few days ago in DCOM. Back then, Fi commented it was strange how nothing unusual was happening, and when asked about her brooch, she explained it was a memento of her mother. Fi was raised by an elderly pair of researchers, as her actual mother apparently died after childbirth. After she gave her a hug to comfort her unease, we come back to the present where Phi's death is confirmed by the intercom as well as Q-Team, and Zero puts them to sleep again, assuring them they will be forgetting these last 90 minutes. Back with C-Team, they now wake up locked up in the control room, which manages the air, water, and electricity for the shelter, noting it's already 10 minutes into the new year. Akane gives a lot of praise to Carlos' firefighting success, also noting how jaded Junpei has grown, to which the jealous Junpei realizes he's just grown out of playing the hero. As they solve the puzzle to escape the room, the solution actually catches fire, prompting the fire suppression system. Unfortunately, it doesn't shut off even after the fire is gone, and is now flooding the room with carbon dioxide. An automated voice now states a decision game will commence, in which they must find an oxygen mask before suffocating, and though they guess correctly, only one mask is presented. Agreeing to save Akane, both Junpei and Carlos give her the mask, while Junpei holds her and shares with her a fond memory from their childhood. As Carlos and Junpei pass out and die, Junpei drops the ring he was meaning to give Akane, and after escaping the room with all 6 X-passes and Junpei's ring, Akane makes a decision to leave the shelter by herself. As Sigma and Diana wake up, they wonder where Phi is and notice it's 4 minutes past midnight now. They look for Phi but cannot find her anywhere, as Zero introduces them to the transporter room. It contains a device discovered by Germans in 1888 at the South Pole, who later deduced it did not come from this world and either an alternate world or distant planet. Despite not knowing how exactly it worked, they figured out what it did, and that is transport things through space-time. By placing something in the 2 input green pods, it will be recreated perfectly in the 2 output yellow pods. The thing is, it takes a lot of time and energy, so once used, it cannot be used again for 10 months. Multiple objects can be placed in a single pod, but only 1 human per pod. Also, only the atomic data of that object is transported, not the object itself, and not just transported to the past or present, but also alternate timelines. The problem is, the machine is out of power, but if they can restore it, they can use it however they want. After figuring out the activation of the alien tech, they succeed, and on cue, the intercom announces the deceased of Carlos, Junpei, all of Q-Team, and Phi. Sigma and Diana are shocked to learn this, and more so that Akane opened the X door and left them both sealed here forever. In denial, Sigma continues to desperately search for Phi, until Diana spots the incinerator, and in a memory flash causes her to pass out, as they both accept the truth and circumstance. Now ready to defy this history, Sigma goes to the transporter room and sends a copy of both himself and Diana to the previous day. As they exit the input pods, they wonder if the process worked, but Sigma says the process is like a fax machine, where a copy is produced elsewhere, but the original doesn't go anywhere. Still, with that, they now truly have no other options. With the transporter room on cooldown for another 10 months, they wait for Akane to return with help, as they do have enough food to last them for 10 months. However, after a month, Diana starts to go stir-crazy, but Sigma is there to heal her of her fractured past with an abusive ex-husband. Growing closer, Sigma shows he knows almost everything about her, as he reveals he actually lived with her for 3 years in a different timeline. As they fall in love here, they conceive a pair of fraternal twins, but the time comes when their food comes to an end. Walking over to Gab, Sigma thanks him for being there this entire time, which has saved him mentally and literally many times. He then shows Diana how the transporter has now finally recharged and how he intends to send a copy of their children into the past before Zero tames the machines in 2009. Diana agrees it's what's best and places them in the input pods. Before sending them, they agree on the babies' names, with the boy being named Delta after Diana's initial mixed with the Greek alphabet like Sigma, and the girl named Phi after their friend. She sends Phi's brooch with Phi and her own blue music box with Delta, as the 2 children are copied to the past and the fates of their original selves, Sigma, Diana, and Gab, are unknown. As Carlos voted for D-Team as planned, Q-Team betrayed the plan and also voted for D-Team, killing off Diana, Sigma, and Phi. Carlos and Akane wake up at 1800 hours, locked up in the pantry, and notice Junpei is missing. During their search, Carlos asks about her relationship to Junpei, and she admits she loves him, but also something has changed him over the last year and she wants to help him now. Searching around for clues to escape, they keep finding dismembered body parts until finally finding Junpei's severed head in a freezer. Over the intercom, it's confirmed all of D-Team and Junpei are dead. Finding a bloodied axe and a chainsaw nearby, they use these tools to break out of the room, but now grieve over their loss. Carlos wonders how this happened, as all he wanted was the money from this test to go to curing his little sister Maria, who suffers from reverie syndrome. Hearing this, Akane suddenly accuses Carlos of killing Junpei, coming at him with a chainsaw. Carlos defends himself with an axe, stating she's suspect too, especially with how hysterical she is, and to this Akane pulls back and flees into the next room. Carlos tries to think what happened in the 4-hour gap since they last fell asleep, but Akane now cuts the lights and comes right back for Carlos. Figuring it had to be either of them, Carlos makes a quick decision. Accepting it must have been him who killed Junpei, Carlos takes the axe to his own neck, killing himself and dying at Akane's arms, who calms down from this. Afterwards, Q-Team wakes up around 1810, and Eric finds a secret door to the final room in their ward, a study. Finding ways to unlock the multiple safes in the room, they find a gun, crossbow, and grenade launcher, and a note stating to kill one. They now see a video of Junpei and Carlos' deaths and an announcement confirming that and D-Team's death, meaning there is only one more X-Pass required to open the final door. Realizing what this means alongside the note, they dash for the weapons and find themselves in a three-way standoff. Eric is surprised Mira's pointing a weapon at him, but Q states it's because she never loved him like he wanted to think. Thinking quickly and choosing to shoot Eric, Q hits him in the shoulder, knocking him down, and as he lays bleeding on the floor, Mira walks over and looks at him before shooting him in the head, after he smiles and states he forgives her. Q is shocked at how calm she was during it, and she confirms they weren't even dating, so all of Eric's feelings were in his head, though mentions he acted just like her first victim did. She confesses she doesn't understand most emotion, and with this takes the crossbow bolt in Eric and uses it to cut out Eric's heart. She explains ever since she was little she was called callous and unfeeling, but her mother said people had hearts that control these emotions. Wanting to see one for herself, she went into the park and stabbed a woman who went down an isolated path. While cutting out her heart, she explained she wanted to see a heart for herself, and the woman attempted to smile and beg her not to do it anymore, and that she forgave her, just like Eric did. When Mira found the heart, she found it gave her a warm sensation, and after seeing the dying smile on the woman's face, associated the two. After this, she became the infamous Heart Ripper, tearing out people's hearts, finding out how they felt by touching them, and observing their faces when they died. Now digging out Eric's heart, she finds out Eric truly did love her, and discovering what that emotion finally feels like. As Q and Mira leave, they spot the cryptic message again, and Q thinks it may be an anagram and finds the message to be, "The truth is invisible." Not really stopping to ponder its meaning, Q and Mira leave the shelter alongside Gab to an unknown fate. Calmly accepting it had to have been Akane who killed off Junpei, he attempts to plead with her one more time, but with a swing she saws off Carlos' hand with a wristband on it. In painful retaliation, Carlos swiftly hacks at Akane's neck, dropping her quickly. As she dies, she cries at her loss of Junpei and now vengeance, as Carlos is rattled at the action of killing someone. At this time, the consciousness of Carlos from the timeline where he was about to be killed by Q for breaking the rules arrives, and looking around, he's not pleased to see the timeline this version of him was in. Still, he treats his wounds, and focuses on telling Q-Team about the hidden door location connecting their wards. Q-Team now wakes up locked up in the pod room, though Mira is nowhere to be found. While solving the puzzles within, they locate a shotgun, but are shocked to find Mira dead in one of these pods. When Q notes that there are strange marks on her neck that suggest strangulation, Eric freezes up with traumatic flashbacks of when he was a kid, and his abusive father strangled his younger brother Chris right in front of him and forced Eric to dump his dead body in a lake. Eric's post-traumatic stress compels him to keep on smiling to cope with the abuse, but just then on a nearby screen, they are shown the situation of C-Team, in which Junpei is dead and Akane is killed by Carlos. The intercom then confirms the death count so far as D-Team, plus Junpei, Akane, and Mira, so 6 X-Passes are revealed. Q happily states they can finally leave now, but Eric turns to him, furious and suspicious of his eagerness, and now thinks Q conspired with Carlos to kill the 6 they did, including Mira. He begins to strangle Q himself, but Q pushes back Eric with surprisingly overwhelming force. Using the key found during the puzzle, Q unlocks the room and flees to the X door, but an unhinged Eric is right behind, shotgun in hand. He quickly shoots the keypad so Q cannot escape, and then puts the gun to Q's face, demanding he name Mira's killer. Q desperately exclaims he doesn't know, and Eric frustratedly believes him. He grieves and mentions how he intended to marry her, when they now hear Gab come out from the vents. Q finds the note from Carlos telling them to search the family portrait in the pod room, and doing so, find a hidden yellow door but no means of opening it. They opt to search Mira's body for any clues, but Q notes it's awfully suspicious how Mira has blood and skin on her fingernails but no wounds of her own, meaning she likely resisted while being strangled. But that's odd since that would mean she was awake while being strangled when she should have been knocked out like the rest of them. Unable to discuss it further, Zero now comes in to inform them they will now sleep and lose memory the past 90 minutes. At this time, the copies of Sigma and Diana step out of the export pod, noting it's 1805 on the previous day. Exploring, they are horrified to soon find a room where all 3 of them are dead with their heads blown off from the explosive collars, meaning they traveled to the timeline where they were killed from losing the initial vote. Escaping a trapped locker room, they also find a hidden yellow door not marked on their map. With the passcode being the birth date for their twin children learned from another timeline, they enter Ward Q and end up in their pod room. They open a pod to find Eric inside and wake him up, also waking up Q in another pod. They discover Mira dead in another pod, but also a dead Akane, Junpei, and the bodies of the dead Phi, Diana, and Sigma from this timeline. Sigma is dismayed to learn they didn't transport to a timeline where Phi existed as he planned, but on cue, a screen shows Carlos killing Akane, and then reveals the 6 X passes for the 6 dead people here. Thinking Carlos will escape before them, they hurry to the Ward D X door, though Q questions what ward they are in, where they also run into Carlos somehow also there, who puts down his axe and tries to explain things. However, they see the X door keypad is destroyed somehow, and Eric now approaches them, shotgun in hand, stating he did it. While it's hazy, he remembers what happened before he was put to sleep, and demands again to know who killed Mira. Carlos comes out and says he shifted from another timeline here, and Sigma is surprised to hear he has the same power as him. He also points out he couldn't have killed a member of Q Team since he was in Ward C, but then Q mentions they should be in Ward Q. But Sigma says this was Ward D. Diana notices something off about the walls now, and asks a frazzled Eric to shoot at the wall. Doing so, it's revealed the whole room except for the physical objects are all an elaborate simulation, and as she figures, there was only ever one ward. As they compare each of their maps, they find the rooms fit over each other perfectly too. Wondering how they never ran into each other or all voted at 13:30, Diana has them each check their watches, and it turns out C Team is 2 hours later than Q Team, who's 2 hours later than D Team, so the teams are actually active at different times, and everyone else was asleep in the pods. To prove this, the time to be put to sleep for D Team will be soon, but to beat it she slips an alien material card from the transporter room under the bracelet, and the injection needles for that team break as they attempt to knock out just D Team. Bringing things back to himself, Eric still wants to know who killed Mira, and still suspects Carlos, demanding he prove he can shift by doing it now. Carlos agrees, but before doing so asks Diana to show him how to use a transporter. Unafraid now, he tells Eric to shoot him now, who doesn't hesitate to do so, and while this body is killed, Carlos shifts back again to his original time, mid-fight against a Q robot. Dodging at the last second, the Q robot smashes itself into the wall, dropping the simulation, and Carlos is fine. He quickly takes them to the transporter room, preparing to send them to another timeline, but a recording of Zero comes on, stating his message is a recording, as in this timeline he is dead because of Carlos, but he is alive in another timeline where C-Team is dead. Getting an idea of where to go now, Carlos sends Akane and Junpei there, though in that timeline where he is dead, he cannot shift there without a living body, so that leaves out the timeline he just left too. Thinking of another timeline to go to, the killer Q from before attacks again, though Carlos deflects him, sending him into the machinery that causes the whole room to explode, forcing Carlos to shift once more to a timeline where he pressed the yellow button in the decontamination room. Back in the previous timeline, Eric now aims his gun at the others, stating he won't stop until they're all dead. He takes aim at Q next, and possibly demanding proof he did not kill Mira. In response, Q, who now knows the code to take off his helmet, does so, revealing to everyone that he's not a human and his blood is white. So, with the red blood found under Mira's nails, he could not have been the one to strangle her. He also reveals he was created by Zero to support him in this game. In fact, he also identifies Zero's real name as Delta, which sounds oddly familiar to Sigma and Diana, and points out their voyeur directly. At this time, perspective shifts to reveal that the camera angles so far have been from the perspective of an onlooking Zero this whole time. Standing from his wheelchair, he confirms Sean's statement, as the group remembers back during the DCOM experiment, they were introduced to a blind deaf wheelchair-bound man named Q, who takes off his glasses to reveal strange purple eyes, and that his glasses are a special feed that let him observe all the cameras in the facility. He reveals he was the one who killed Mira, but Mira was working with him the whole time, like how she helped dismember Junpei. She was also exempt from the drug injections, and was allowed to roam free and do whatever she wanted. Still, she was the serial killer, the Heart Ripper, and had to suffer punishment for the many lives she stole. Now thinking to force Zero to open the X door, he tells them the code to open a panel that will enable Sean to connect to the central computer and open the door again. However, Eric suddenly shoots both Sean and Sigma, claiming his body moved on its own, and Delta states he has no more need for this history, using some sort of mental power to force Eric to kill himself as well. Turning to Diana, Delta finally calls to his birth mother as this timeline ends. After deciding to stick to the plan, Carlos votes for D Team, Diana votes for Q Team, and Q Team votes for C Team. Zero chimes in to commend each team for voting in a timely manner and rewards them by not erasing their memory this time, wanting them to wake up with full memory of their choices. As C Team wakes up locked inside the decontamination room at 1810, they wonder if this is another decision game of sorts. As they wait, Akane calls out Junpei for wanting to kill Q Team first, and Junpei points out she's of the same mind. Carlos wonders how there's such animosity between childhood friends who also survived the Nonary game a year ago, and Junpei begins by explaining how after surviving, he quit school and joined a detective firm to try and find Akane who disappeared after the Nonary game. Despite all the death he already saw during the game, dealing with the seedy underground exposed him to the worst of humanity, as every case he worked was dangerous and dirty. He got jaded over time, but then finally got a lead that Akane was joining the Mars experiment. Akane reflects on this, as Junpei asks her how her brother Aoi, called Santa in the last game, was doing. He speaks of other survivors of the Nonary game, as Ace is still in jail as far as he knows, Lotus is working and raising her kids just fine, and he once worked with fellow detective Seven to destroy Free the Soul's headquarters. Free the Soul is a cult that abducted Akane and her brother 10 years ago, and Junpei demands to know why Akane joined the Mars experiment. She explains she infiltrated to try and stop a terrible plan Free the Soul is trying to put in motion and save a distant future. Zero now comes over the intercom to announce the choice to kill the other two teams with acid by pressing the yellow button in their cell. In this timeline, they choose to believe in the other teams, so they do not press the button. However, in another timeline, Carlos feels someone controlling his actions, forcing him to press this button. As this kills the other two teams and frees C Team, they move to now leave through the X door. However, Carlos says he suddenly cannot leave, as he states he promised to save Junpei and Akane in another timeline, as he stays behind and moves to use the transporter device. As Q Team wakes up locked inside the decontamination room at 1808, they wonder if this simply isn't more of a decom isolation experiment, and the threat of death is to kick in their survival instincts. Zero now comes over the intercom to announce the choice to kill the other two teams with acid, but choosing to believe in the other teams, they do not press the button either. As D-Team now wakes up locked up inside the decontamination room at 1809, as they wait, Phi explains more about her and Sigma's odd circumstances to prevent a terrible fate for mankind. She mentions how both of them originate from the year 2028, were pulled to 2074, and then sent back to 2029 where they then lived normally. Upon reaching 2074 again, they were booted to late 2028 here, where they need to stop Radical 6 from getting out and killing 6 billion people. They're also here helping Akane, who is the leader of Crash Keys, a group working to save the world. Zero now comes over the intercom to announce the choice to kill the other two teams with acid. However, choosing to believe in the other teams, they do not press the button either. As C-Team wakes up again at 0003, they see no one has died yet and think to examine the Force Quit box. Carlos has a sudden memory of the password, and it works, revealing a device that says the central computer must be booted up first before it can be used. Carlos reflects on the many timelines where he's died already, as that information comes to him. After thinking for a bit, he suddenly punches away Junpei and tries to assault Akane, spurring Junpei into a murderous rage. As Carlos lets Junpei beat him up out of sight, some time passes and Carlos and Junpei now return, apparently okay with things now, as Zero puts them all to sleep again. As Q-Team wakes up again at 0003, they notice the Force Quit box already opened. Seeing the prompt to start the central computer, Sean suddenly remembers how to do so from other timelines thanks to his mind being the quantum computer, revealing he is a robot who can interface with the computer. Doing so, they return to the Force Quit box, noting it now says to enter her mother's mementos, but they're not sure what that means, as Zero puts them all to sleep again. As D-Team now wakes up, it's 0003, and they now notice the Force Quit box is already opened. When it prompts them for Mother's mementos, Diana once again painfully remembers things from other timelines, realizing how she's actually Phi's mother. Rushing over to hug her, Sigma and Phi suddenly regain their memories from each other's timelines as well. As they all finally acknowledge their delayed reunion, they share an overdue family hug. After this, Sigma reveals the ward is the same for all three teams again, and at this time, the other two teams all enter the lounge too, as Carlos reveals he used Diana's trick to break the needles and avoid being put to sleep again. Akane and Junpei then state they spent the last few hours downloading all the memories they could from the morphogenetic field. Eric and Mira aren't espers, so instead Sean used his time in the computer to hack his own systems to turn off his sleep system and turn off the surveillance long enough for them to also break their wristband needles. For C-Team, Carlos used the info gained from other timelines to guide Akane to the transport room to get the cards there and distract Zero by starting a fight with Junpei. At this time, Zero steps out himself, gun in hand, and revealing that everyone on C and D team are espers, and shifters at that. Sean is linked to the quantum computer that lets him remember things from a different timeline, so it's similar, but confirm Eric and Mira are like him and are not shifters. Instead, his esper power is Mind Hack, which allows him to telepathically read minds, so with this, he knows what all of them know now without shifting himself. He constructed this whole scenario for several reasons and to accomplish several things, mainly to ensure he would be born. He explains now that he and Phi are Diana and Sigma's children, where after they were born, they were transported to 1904, where the transporter was located in a German research facility at the time. He is currently 124 years old, but Phi was sent to 2008 as part of an experiment where it was in America at that time, and Phi was raised by a couple of old researchers. Diana and Sigma had to be in a crisis situation when they created Delta and Phi to ensure their children would have the genetic traits to survive, in this case, Esper powers. Angered at all of this, Phi rushes her brother Delta with a signature jump kick, knocking the gun away from his hand. Eric grabs it and points it at Delta, while Phi urges Diana to quickly activate the Force Quick Box with her brooch and Diana's blue bird. Accepting the items, the Force Quick Box now begins a self-destruct countdown for the whole shelter, and chuckling, Delta reveals there is not only no way to stop the explosion now, but also he mentions he shot Gab with a shotgun earlier, enraging the whole group. He then reveals his mind hack ability can not only read minds, but also briefly control the body of others, using it to force Eric to shoot him. He then gives them a final decision game to stay here and die, but dies before he can tell them the other option. As time winds down, Akane suggests they all shift, and Carlos believes that with all 6 of them resonating, they could even bring Eric and Mira along. Thinking of a history in which all 9 of them are alive, they remember the history with which they won the coin toss in the very beginning. There is a debate about whether it's ethically right to overwrite another history just because they think they are more correct now, but in the end they decide to shift. Now back with the original group that won the coin toss, they are all standing out in the desert in a daze, when their shifted minds now enter their other selves. Waking up now, they quickly check their situation and celebrate the successful group shift. Waiting for them outside is this Timeline Zero, who remarks how life is unfair, recounting the story again of how a snail once traveled down a path in a park and this affected all of them here. They threaten to have Delta arrested for murder, but he points out in this timeline no one has died, and the only reason he knows about what happened in the other histories is because of his telepathy. In addition, all evidence and machinery in the shelter has been removed while they slept, and in this timeline Radical 6 hasn't broken out. However, even though he saved 2 billion in another timeline with Radical 6, they chose to shift here, in a world where a terrorist will cause nuclear extinction for everyone. To this, Carlos confidently states things are different now, because now they each know, and can work together to prevent that terrible future, and everyone rallies behind him. Delta laughs, saying they wouldn't be saying all that if they didn't just go through all what they did, but putting them all in this mindset without anyone dying was another of the goals of his plan that worked. In short, Delta created another future in which all of mankind will be saved as well. He questions if they are all still mad at him for toying with their lives, and gives them a final choice. He hands Carlos a gun, and simply asks him to choose to shoot him or let him go, promising not to use mind hacking for it. Taking aim, Carlos plays the final decision game. As the game ends, we recount the story of the snail, in which Eric's mother went jogging in the park and went down a different fork in the road from normal in order to avoid a snail in the path. Because of this, she was seized and killed by Mira, who began her path as the Heartripper killer, and Eric would live under an abusive father until he would meet Mira again at his job and begin dating her. Akane's father was falsely convicted and killed for this crime, which prompted her mother to commit suicide, leaving Akane and her brother orphaned, which led to their later abduction and the events of 999, which dragged in Junpei. Before being arrested, Akane's father called a cab, but a surgeon stepped in instead, who was going to operate on Sean, but it later instead died in a car accident, killing himself and subsequently Sean, who befriended Delta in the hospital. As time passes, the fates of Akane, Junpei, Phi, and Sigma in one timeline follow the route of Virtue's last reward, while in this timeline, Diana and Sigma indeed travel to the moon, where they spend the next 3 years with each other before Diana passes from an illness. The first Phi copy sent to 1904 with Delta would live on to adopt the second copy of her that was sent to 2008. Emily, Carlos' sister, would recover from Reverie Syndrome now that it's been properly identified as her being an Esper, and Carlos, who did not shoot Delta, now assists with locating the terrorist that will start the nuclear apocalypse. With Akane and Junpei, they become engaged but won't marry until the terrorist is found. To the side, Junpei knows there is a history where he is still searching for Akane for decades into his seniority and knows the treasure this time now. With Eric and Mira, they would get married, though Mira would go to jail for her crimes and Eric and Sean would still visit her. One day, Sean points out Mira can never pay off her crimes in this timeline, but there is one way she can fix things elsewhere. Breaking her out of jail, Sean says he knows where the transporter is being stored now, and says he'll send her back to the past to prevent her from ever murdering Eric's mother in the first place, and thus prevent a timeline like this one to begin with, just because of one small snail. Zero Escape, Zero Time Dilemma has enjoyed the success of selling over 23,000 copies worldwide.